The impasse at the national carrier Kenya Airways seems to have been resolved after the airline announced that 3 of its top managers were dismissed as a precondition tabled by the pilots for a return-to-work agreement. Although operations have resumed at the airline, huge losses were incurred after close to 20 flights were cancelled. KTN's Abiagina now reports on the impending retrenchment exercise set to begin at the airline and what some of the implications are for the staff.
Grounded aircrafts dotted the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport for the better part of last week as the Kenya Airlines Pilots Association, KALPA, made good their threat to down their tools.
It is time to end the rhetoric and salvage the pride of Africa. As the association representing members in Kenya's employment, KALPA has a vested interest in the recovery of the national airline, Kenya Airways.
The pilots have been fronting for a shake-up at the company's top leadership, accusing them of not being suitable to occupy office. Among the areas of contention for the pilots was better working conditions and terms of service.
We reaffirm the KALPA membership vote of no confidence in the Kenya's CEO, Goons, and call for his immediate resignation.
The speedy resolution to end the strike was a major relief not only for passengers but for the airline, which is in the red. Kenya Airways has been experiencing turbulence for a while now, casting fresh doubts of a short-term recovery. The airline in its trading results reported a record loss of 25.7 billion shillings in its 2015 results.
I think it's important to recognize that it's a marathon, not a sprint. And as we turn around the business, we will come back to profitability in time. I don't want to assure or promise to say it will be tomorrow. Yes. Let us prove it by our actions. We are right now at the end of the review process of our preparation of our budget and the bankable plan.
This, the airline attributed to a slowdown in tourist arrivals occasioned by terror attacks at Kenya's coastal city, as well as the Ebola outbreak that rocked West Africa, one of the airline's key routes. To stay afloat, the national carrier, which is partly owned by Dutch carrier KLM, has been implementing a recovery strategy to bring back the airline to profit-making ways.
I think we've got to take heart, because even in the midst of all the difficulties that we've been going through, we're still flying daily. The first thing we said is that we are looking towards closing the profitability gap, because we have made losses and we need to narrow that loss. Number 2, revisiting our business model to make sure that it is competitive and that we are competing at our position of strength.
Part of the recovery plan the airline is implementing beginning this month is to cut down the workforce by about 15%. 600 staff face retrenchment as part of the downsizing.
In this period, we have closed quite a number of deals, for example, reducing our fleet costs. Yeah. We've sold aircrafts, we have subleased others, and combined, those will be saving us from next month $8 million a month, 800 million shillings a month in terms of fleet costs.
With the dust yet to settle at the airline following the strike just a few days ago, the hurdle now will be how it drives the retrenchment exercise, which is aimed at saving the airline close to 2 billion shillings in its payroll.
The important thing to note is that they know that we are going through a turnaround. They know that there are some tough decisions that we have to make in relation to people, because as you're resizing the business, there will be some people decisions. But they know also, and we've talked about this, that when we are ready to talk about those decisions, we will come to them in a respectable way, because there are channels for that conversation to be had. And we said that by the end of the month, in the next 3-4 weeks, we will be ready to have that conversation. But they also understand that those are difficult decisions that we'll have to make. And the staff have told us, hey, listen, please come and tell us. Tell us when you're ready, because we don't want to be in this anxiety position, but they understand that position.
The staff rationalization plan was agreed upon by the board, running parallel to asset sales or leasing to free up cash for operations in its turnaround bid, dubbed Operation Pride. Abiagina, KTN Business Today.
Thanks, Abby. Now, let's take a look at what else Mbuvi Ngunze had to say in an interview we did earlier with him regarding what's happening at the national carrier, that is Kenya Airways. Now, last year, after they announced the big loss, the biggest loss in corporate history, Kenya Airways took on the Operation Pride, and they had a number of advisors, that includes McKinsey and PJT partners, to restructure and also to give financial advice in regard to how they could narrow their losses at the airline. And KTN Zabi Agena had that conversation with him. Let's listen in to what he had to say about closing the profitability gap.
I think we've got to take heart, because even in the midst of all the difficulties that we've been going through, we're still flying daily. The first thing we said is that we are looking towards closing the profitability gap, because we have made losses and we need to narrow that loss. Number two, revisiting our business model to make sure that it is competitive and that we are competing at our position of strength. And the third thing, how do we create a sustainable financial structure for this business? And each of those things we are now executing. If I say, for example, reducing the profitability gap, in this period we have closed quite a number of deals. For example, reducing our fleet costs. Yeah. We've sold aircrafts, we have subleased others, and combined, those will be saving us from next month $8 million a month, 800 million shillings a month in terms of fleet costs. Mm-hmm. Combined there is revenue targets, there is cost targets. And so we are now at the point where the execution in earnest is actually happening.
In short, where you're headed is we're likely to see the airline landing in profitable territory. And how long will this take, Mbuvi?
I think it's important to recognize that it's a marathon, not a sprint. And as we turn around the business, we will come back to profitability in time. I don't want to assure or promise to say it will be tomorrow. Yes. Let us prove it by our actions. We are right now at the end of the review process of our preparation of our budget and the bankable plan. Yeah.
What would be your message right now to the employees?
We speak to our staff every time. In fact, even last week I wrote a note to the staff just updating them on where we are on the turnaround. The important thing to note is that they know that we are going through a turnaround. They know that there are some tough decisions that we have to make in relation to people, because as you're resizing the business, there will be some people decisions. But they know also, and we've talked about this, that when we are ready to talk about those decisions, we will come to them in a respectable way, because there are channels for that conversation to be had. And we said that by the end of the month, in the next 3-4 weeks, we will be ready to have that conversation. But they also understand that those are difficult decisions that we'll have to make. And the staff have told us, hey, listen, please come and tell us. Tell us when you're ready, because we don't want to be in this anxiety position. But they understand that position.
And that is Kenya Airways Chief Executive Officer Mbuvi Ngunze speaking to KTN Business. Now, of course, with what's been going on also in the banking industry, we thought it very important to know what the banking players' perspective is in regard to the several banks that have been placed under receivership. That is Dubai Bank last year in August, and then we saw later on Imperial Bank in October of 2015, and the most recent was Chase Bank, which is still in receivership, though under the management of KCB right now. And would now like to hear the perspective of one of the chief executive officers of Barclays Bank of Kenya, that is Jeremy Awori, who gave his views on what exactly is happening in the banking sector, and also what he thinks about the role of auditors in ensuring that banking institutions meet their financial obligations. Let's listen in to that interview. Today, would now like to speak to Jeremy Awori, who is the Managing Director for Barclays Bank of Kenya. Thank you so much for joining us in this edition. Well, to start with, Chase Bank of Kenya has been placed under receivership, and depositors are now a little bit stranded. But what exactly do you think about the bank being placed under receivership?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's clearly very unfortunate what has happened, and I think it's, in many ways, it came as a shock to a lot of people. We've had a relatively stable financial sector for a while. And when you have a scenario where a bank is open 1 minute and then is closed or put into receivership the next, it's very sad to see people who have been impacted through no fault of their own, where they can't access their hard-earned savings or access facilities that they have. So I think what there's a number of things that are going to come out that I think we need to look at. How did we get into that in that situation where, number one, we ended up with a set of financial statements published on one day, the 31st, and then republished with fairly significant changes less than a week later. And then there were a series of announcements, and obviously now social media has shown its power by people spreading messages which ended up with people getting concerned and going in and asking for their money. And then ultimately the bank couldn't fulfill its obligations. I think the other thing is the extent of insider lending. How did it happen? And why did it not come up earlier, whether directly or indirectly? And I guess they'll need to identify if there was fraud involved and act accordingly. And then obviously you've got the element of what was the auditor's role in this in terms of their accounts. In this case, they indicated a qualified opinion, which in itself suggests that they weren't 100% comfortable with the accounts that were presented to them. So I think the governor came in, looked at the situation, and the matters that happened then happened. And I think he's trying to make sure that we follow the regulations properly. In this instance, a correct reclassification of non-performing loans, which is applying the regulatory standard. And as I say, they couldn't meet their obligations. So it ended up with them being put in receivership.
You've talked about the insider lending and also the auditor's role. But do you think that auditors are playing along with banking institutions to give these falsified results?
Yeah, the role of the auditor is to be an independent person, to look at the book of accounts and make sure that they are a fair reflection of the state of affairs of the business to its board and to the shareholders. Yeah, so they're supposed to retain a level of independence. Yeah, so and if they disagree with management's position, yeah, they can issue a qualified opinion or refuse to accept the accounts because they just feel that they're not a reflection of what should be done within those book of accounts. So I think when we look at some of these things, I think what it will do is it was going to raise certain areas where there's going to need to be more rigor. I think it's going to also raise the level of reporting and transparency around certain things like insider lending, whether directly or indirectly through other entities. Frankly, for governance sake, even if it is an entity that is borrowing, but there's a director who is an ultimate beneficiary, if you ask me, that should be disclosed to the board. Yeah.
And that is Chief Executive Officer, Barclays Bank of Kenya, talking to us about what exactly is happening in the banking industry and also what needs to be done to clean out some of the irregularities with some of the banking institutions in the country today. Now, taking you back to a Twitter poll question, we asked, does Labor Day mean anything to you in the working, formal and informal sector? And someone called Moha Caesar from Uganda, you're saying, Labor Day, I just see it as a day to sleep, because even the ruling party in Uganda turned it into a day to celebrate their achievements. And that is a view coming in from Uganda. But then let's just take a look at some of the poll results here to give you an update on what exactly you thought about our Twitter poll question. Does Labor Day mean anything to you in the working, formal and informal sector? Those of you who said yes were at 6%, and those who said I don't care were at 33%. And while those who said no, it doesn't mean anything at all, we're at 61%, which is just about the highest percentage for this Twitter poll question. So in general, Labor Day doesn't mean much to people on Twitter, or at least those who are giving feedback through a Twitter poll. We've come to the end of the show. My name is Joy Doreen Bira. For more business, log on to our website, ktnnews.com or standardmedia.co.ke. And for now, coming up next is News Hour with Akisa Wandera.